Just want to start off by saying a very big thank you to all of you who are joining us here today for what is the first in a series of what will be monthly programming, really designed to help you build connection and relationships with students and other faculty members and families. We're really, really excited to be able to share this information with you free of charge. And in each month's webinar, we will be providing a resource that you can sort of take and use today or tomorrow in your classroom, in your context. So I'm really excited by that, and very thankful to all of you for taking the time to join us today. Excited as always to sort of build this virtual community with you. My name is Glenn Manning. I'm the Senior Project Manager at Harvard's Making Caring Common project. And I'm incredibly lucky to be joined here today by my wonderful colleague, Elise Kaufman, who has a wide range of experiences in schools and is now a current candidate for the, Elise, can you remind me which program are you in at HGSE? Is it L&T?
I'm in Prevention Science and Practice.
Prevention Science and Practice, okay. So again, Elise comes to us with lots of experience in schools, and so we're very, very lucky to have her today. Want to invite you to visit our webpage, sign up for our newsletter, maybe even join us on social media. We'll go ahead and drop a link into the chat if we haven't already done that. You can go ahead and use that to check out the wide range of initiatives and reports and research that we've produced, as well as a whole bunch of resources that are available for free, virtual and in-person resources. Several of you have gotten in touch after last week's webinar and asked me about the Caring Schools Network a little bit more. As always, I like to share just a little bit at the beginning about how we work. Our team helps schools administer school-wide student, staff, and family surveys, and we interpret those results for you. We'll then go ahead and provide relevant classroom and school building and family resources that are really meant to promote specific social, emotional, and ethical capacities in young folks, also meant to reduce problem behaviors like bullying and harassment. So we're available for consultation, for professional development, and presentations throughout the year. If that's something of interest and you'd like to deepen your commitment to this work and maybe expand it within your school or district, do let us know. We'll go ahead and drop a link as well to the Caring Schools Network. And just let us know by email if that's easier. If you have any questions following up from this webinar, you can go ahead and get in touch at the web address there that you see, or through the email address that you see at caringschools with an S at makingcaringcommon.org. Okay, got lots to jump into here today, so I'm very excited to get going. A little bit about Making Caring Common before we jump into the nuts and bolts today. I just wanted to share a little bit about Making Caring Common, which is, again, a project at Harvard Graduate School of Education. We help educators and families raise kids who care about others and the common good. That's our central focus. And so we really think that, there is a potential sort of reality where children understand and learn how to treat each other well day to day, and, kind of really come to understand and seek fairness and justice in their school communities, in their home communities, and perhaps in the global community. And ultimately, maybe even do what is right, even if it comes at a cost to them. So this is sort of our vision and one that we are working toward always. Appreciate your help in doing that. Can't do it without you. So we really do think that young folks with these kinds of capacities and dispositions will become community members who care about others and who start to heal fractures within our society, create a more caring and just world. Appreciate having you along in this work. So the learning goals for today's webinar, and speak a little bit about why this work matters right now. Then we'll dive right into the strategy and discuss how it can be used to first get a sense of the relationships between students and school adults, and then connect those students who perhaps don't have a trusted adult to folks who can reach out and build that connection. We'll take a little bit of time to share out during our reflective periods, and also take questions at the end. So if you have questions that you'd like to add to the Q&A, that's terrific. And otherwise, if you have a really burning question that you think is highly pertinent, go ahead and ask us in the chat. Okay, we really have two primary goals today. The big goal is for you, again, as I said before, to walk away from this webinar with a real sense of how to implement this strategy. We want you to have a tool at the end of the virtual lesson here that you can bring into your school or whatever context in which you're working. And we want to make sure that you feel that you have the ability to modify and change this to meet your needs. We're here to help in that regard. I hope you'll follow up after the webinar if that's helpful. We're happy to always talk about ways that this can be used in a variety of different contexts and for other goals as well. The second goal that we're really trying to hit here is want you to begin to connect with our community, our online virtual community, get to know one another. One really great way to do that is through our Caring Schools Network, which I mentioned before. If you're interested in hearing more about that, I hope you will let us know. So even before we get into the nitty gritty, the how-to part of today, I want to just take a second and address and really kind of acknowledge the fact that we are, of course, in trying times, and there's an additional difficulty now at this point in creating relationships and making students feel cared for within their school community. I think I've heard from folks across the country, around the world, really, teachers, administrators, counselors, school support staff, you really name it. Folks have come out of the woodwork to let me know that, a lot of their work with students in terms of relationship building has been almost entirely reset. The work before us now seems to be to simultaneously support students who might not even be showing up, while at the same time supporting other students who are very engaged. It's going to be a difficult task, but I hope that the tool we have here for you today will go a long way toward addressing that difficulty. As we sort of start to consider students' zones of development or their ability to connect with us, I think it's important we remember that for some of our students, success looks like building just one connection with an adult. For others, it might be to deepen and sustain a number of caring relationships with adults and students. So we just have students in lots of different places, which, of course, that's going to be true with any skill or capacity. But I think it's important that we understand where students are as we engage with them and try to build relationships with them. That's why we've adapted this strategy for online use. In case you are working online, you can use this tool in your virtual environment. If you're in person, there's also an in-person version. So make sure that you're looking to the version that makes the most sense for you. I also wanted to just address the fact that this is a tool which I think, if used in the right way, if you're asking certain kinds of questions of the data that arise from this process, what you might be able to find is that it's highly connected to work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a way that we can sort of be digging into these data and saying, for example, what sorts of students in our school, perhaps which demographics of students, for example, or students from which part of the neighborhood seem to have the most caring connections, which ones seem not to. Why might that be? And what maybe is either systemically or individually getting in the way of building connections sort of more equitably, and really doubling down on that call to bring into the fold all members of our school community. So a really great opportunity, I think, to sort of marry our work around equity and inclusion with our work around building relationships and engagement with students. Okay, so what I would like to do is take a couple of minutes for reflection before we really look too closely at the strategy itself. So, of course, before we can build relationships with students, we have to be in communication with them. So maybe we can just take a couple of minutes. I've got a little timer here. And what we can do is write about, or maybe even hit up the chat if you're bold and feeling enlivened today to share with the rest of us. the answer to the question that you see on your screen, which for those of you who are listening along and not keeping an eye on the screen, is how have you been keeping track of communication that you have with students this year? Are there students perhaps that you've heard from less? Are there students you've heard from more? Why might that be? So what I will do now is I will click our fun little timer here, and we will take a minute, a couple of minutes. Maybe we'll start with about 50 seconds. And again, a quick reflection. How have you been keeping track of communication with students? Are there students that you've heard from more, or students you've heard from a little less, and why might that be? Again, if you'd like to fill in the chat with ways that you are keeping in communication with students, that would be terrific. I think others enjoy hearing best practices from one another. It's also, I think, really often helpful to just hear that maybe I'm doing things that are similar to what others are doing, and I'm not really missing the boat too much. You know, it's always good to know that I'm among peers with my practices. So starting to see the chat fill in now with some of these. Really appreciate that. Hearing about mentor logs and touch point with youth. I think that's a great way of doing it. Having a centralized location, digital centralized location is great. Jacqueline Kruger mentions that they've created and shared a Google form that counselors are using, which is great. Schoology is another, I think, wonderful opportunity. Diane, thank you for that. I believe Schoology is an LMS and has, I think, functionality that does allow for tracking, communication with students, which is, again, anytime that we can leverage technology, I think that that's going to be helpful for us. There are, of course, limits to that, but in this case, it can certainly be helpful. So do keep an eye on that chat. I'm sure others will have additional wonderful ideas, and hopefully this reflection period sets us up nicely to start to jump in and think a little bit about how we can encourage more communication with our students, but also start to really get a sense of the data around who we might want to reach out to. Okay, so before we talk a little bit about the strategy objectives, I'd like to ask a quick question of you. So I will go ahead and launch this poll. And the poll, as you'll see in a second, is really asking how often you collect data on student relationships. So let's go ahead and take a second to answer the poll question here. You should see a box that allows you to check off certain answers. I believe it's you're only able to check off one answer. If you don't see the box, just go ahead and let us know in the chat, and we will make sure that we can troubleshoot with you. I'll leave it open for a minute here. I think that we've got about 30% of folks replying, and it would be great if we could get that number up a little higher, just so that we have a sense maybe of how folks on the call today are doing this. And I want to just mention that, we don't record any of this information or use it in any way. It's really just for us here today to see, which of our peers are doing what, and kind of what the prevalence is of each of these types. So we've got about 57% of folks reporting here. I'll give it maybe another 5 seconds in case there's anybody who'd like to add their 2 cents. It'd be great to get it over a little over 60, but it looks like that's about it. So I'll go ahead and end that poll. And as you might be able to see in a second here, most of us are infrequently and informally collecting data about student relationships. And relationship mapping is going to be a wonderful opportunity for you to get yourself into at least the infrequently and formally category, hopefully into that frequently and formally category, but we'll see. Again, strategy objectives. You can see that there are a lot of different kinds of answers to how we're collecting information, but the relationship mapping strategy itself will be a tool in the toolbox that enables you, again, to identify those students who do or maybe don't have a caring adult and match them up with adults who care and who want to reach out and build a relationship. Also walks you through ways of generating supportive and caring relationships. So for those of us who might have a difficulty with that, we at MCC are really happy to kind of double down on any of the information that's in the strategy and share additional best practices that we've been hearing about from across the country that evidence suggests are helpful, and again, which have been sort of tried and used in other schools that we are in contact with. So these are our strategy objectives for today. Again, I encourage you to follow along in the strategy itself if that's helpful. We did share the strategy is online, but we will go ahead and share it again now so that you can kind of breeze through and take a quick look, or if you'd like, really kind of follow right along as we move through it today together. I'm also going to go ahead and put in the chat the URL for the sample Google Sheet, which you can use to sort of help map relationships. So there'll be two different links here. Just a little bit of advanced prep that I'd like to cover before we move into sort of the actual virtual mapping. I would email your staff and faculty a sheet with a description and purpose of this activity. You want to, of course, include enough information so that folks feel like they are keyed into what is actually going to happen, but not so much that we overwhelm people. And provide instructions either within an email or perhaps on a separate document that you attach to the email. One really important piece of information that folks always wonder about is what's going to happen to these data. After we're collecting information about student and staff connections, where does that information go and what is done with it? We, again, are here to help you think through that for you and your school in your context. I think it's going to be a little bit different for each school. And so we're really happy to touch base and kind of troubleshoot with you. In addition to that first email, or maybe as a part of that same first email that you send out to all school staff, you want to schedule either an online meeting with the entire staff or online meetings with groups that comprise the entire staff and faculty. So could be broken up by grade levels, could be broken up by departments, might even be sort of divided up based on houses if you're in like kind of a big traditional high school. Really depends. But again, we can do this as a whole staff. We could do it during a staff meeting, an all school staff meeting. Or we can just be sort of doing it in individual small groups. But we want to make sure that we're asking all adults in the school to attend at least one of these virtual meetings. And that should really include teachers and counselors and coaches. I always suggest that support staff are going to be some of the most important folks in the building, and so they should definitely be included. And that includes nurses and front office staff and paraprofessionals. Bus drivers can be really important connections to students, as can janitorial staff. So I really can't sort of express enough how important it is that every adult in the building has an opportunity to take a look at the relationship map sheet itself and mark where they feel they are with regard to any given student. It can sometimes be the case that a janitor is the one who has the tightest connection with a student, and is really the reason why that kid is coming back to school, engaged academically, etc. So we're going to ask that all school adults attend and do some mapping. I would really ensure that the online document that you're using, if we're working virtually, is able to be accessed and edited by everyone, by all school adults. At the same time, we want to ensure that the share settings are appropriate. So if you're sharing, let's say, a Google Sheet, for example, making sure that only school adults are on that list of people with whom the document is shared, perhaps locking down access at certain points, and maybe even revoking access once the mapping has taken place. Once again, the nitty-gritty of how to do some of those things, we're happy to talk through with you. There are some ideas in the strategy, but if you'd like additional support, just let us know. Okay, so you're going to want to make sure that you have a sheet, right? If you're, again, working virtually. And there'll be some, columns, 3 columns in particular, which I'll describe in a second, but make sure to have staff really ask questions about the words you're using. Provide them an opportunity to gain a sense of what is meant by things like at risk. If you choose to use that word, you may not choose to use the word at risk for the top of your columns or the top of your column. Whatever word you use, it should be currency within the school. It should be something that's well understood, something that the adults in the school can really understand. And again, that word might not work for you, but essentially what we're referring to are students who are having a problem socially, academically, or otherwise. And that can encompass a wide range of issues. And I think especially this year and right now, these do not have to be major issues. We want to wrap our arms around every student who needs our support. And so that, let's be clear with staff and faculty that if you have a concern about a student, we can mark that student as at risk. That's okay. This is not a permanent mark, right, on their name. This doesn't go in any kind of personal record. It's really just a matter of reaching out and helping these students, making a connection with them. So in addition to making sure that we understand the words we're using, caring connection, at risk, I would also make sure that staff and faculty have kind of sufficient time to talk through those words and understand what they mean. In addition to that, we want to make sure that staff and faculty have sufficient time to spend actually mapping. Some schools will choose to share the mapping sheet well in advance of the first meeting. If you're in a physical environment, it might be that folks have an opportunity to come into a single room, a particular room of the school that's well staffed by a trusted member of the staff or faculty across a week, even to do some mapping in advance of that the first meeting. In other schools, they've done the mapping during the first meeting. So they've kind of taken an hour and 20 minutes as opposed to an hour for that first meeting. If possible, if you're sharing the map in advance of that first meeting, try to aggregate the data before holding this conversation. Once everyone's had a chance to complete the map, really just ask, I know it's hard, but ask folks to wait until the summary portion of the meeting to really kind of analyze and dig into the list. Our tendency is going to want to be to look at all these names and see which names have what kinds of check marks next to them. But I have done this with schools many times and can say that reviewing the results toward the end of the strategy, I think, can be even more effective. So if you can encourage that, I think do let folks know that we can go ahead and map in advance, but let's not spend too much time analyzing that list until later on. Okay. Just a couple of additional quick tips here. If you are going to divide the school by grade level or departments, however you do choose to split it up, if you don't want to have an entire faculty and staff meeting around this all at once, just, you can very easily make each grade level a kind of a separate tab in your sheet. Just a little helpful hint. The other is that you can be sort of incorporating this task into an existing staff meeting, which I sort of already mentioned, but I think it's a great way to, kind of ensure that you have full participation. So just a couple of ideas there. Many students, of course, as I mentioned before, who were at risk before this pandemic and before the crisis, the several crises that we're facing, are even more at risk now. I think I hear this from educators across the country. We also know that, of course, many students who experience trauma of any sort do so in very different ways at very different times. And so during this reflective meeting, this big first kind of meeting that we're going to hold, I really highly recommend that school adults have the opportunity to not only reflect on the importance of key relationships in their own lives, which I think is a practice that's really worthwhile anyway in its own right, but also, if at all possible, begin to think, or rather begin to link up with students who need support. And so there's kind of, in this first section of the meeting, a time where we want to frame caring relationships and how important they actually are. So if getting into a conversation about one's own relationships, the relationships in our lives, feels maybe a little bit too much too fast for your faculty, your staff, I think that it is perfectly okay to introduce for conversation a piece of research, a finding, maybe even a full article about why positive relationships are important. And you can check out the Making Caring Common website for some examples of that. But we want to think about, who are these relationships with that were important to us? What made them meaningful, right? Who perhaps were students in our past who we really connected with? Maybe even who were some of the adults in schools that we connected with as students when we were young. How did these relationships kind of form? How did they carry forward? What made them meaningful? This is going to be helpful for us as we start to think through ways to connect with the students that we match up with. So hearing from one another about this, especially the way into these relationships, I think can provide us lots of inspiration and some sort of best practices. So in addition to that, I would only just say, make sure to always thank the folks who do share out. I think this is kind of sometimes tough conversation. Maybe folks get a little squeamish around talking about caring relationships with each other. And so gratitude at the end is always really important. In addition, after you've spent some time really framing the conversation, again, I would take about 20 minutes for that. Another 20-minute section of this meeting should be devoted to reflections. So let folks start to analyze that list. Again, this would be the entire list of student names, 2 columns, one on either side of these student names, one that marks students as at risk, the other which identifies students as having a caring connection. And we're going to want to let people really pour through this list. Take a look at every name. What's interesting or surprising? What details seem to sort of pop out at you? Maybe what questions or sort of reflections does the map evoke for you? These are things that we want to not only spend time reflecting on, but perhaps spend some time sharing out about with one another. Again, I think it's really helpful for staff and faculty to hear from one another about this. It might be the case that we have a shared experience of reading through these data. It might be, on the other hand, a situation where there's some divergence in the staff and faculty about these data. So it's often important that we have some time to spend looking through the list and sharing perhaps at table groupings, or it could be, again, depending on how you decide to hold these meetings, with the entire staff in terms of your analysis and your reactions. So again, another 20 minutes there, and then a final 20 minutes would be in the action planning stage. And that's really where we're sort of matching students with staff. I would say that small schools can sometimes be matching, students who have only one caring connection, as opposed to several. Other schools who are really large, or perhaps are strapped for time and resources, and adults who are willing and able to do this work, might choose to just focus on those students who are lacking a caring connection, and start there. I think, again, the data will start to reveal for us how we should focus. But if needed, I think it's fine to assign a coupling where perhaps one adult is sort of trying to link up with a couple of different students. I wouldn't try to match an adult with too many more than that. It can start to feel hard to genuinely do this work with a whole large number of young people. In terms of that match, if needed, you can be assigning couplings based on matching interests, whether that's matching interests in music or food or sports, or any other kind of thing that we think our kids are going to really latch onto. It could be that we're matching based on schedules, and it's just a function of being free at the same time as another student. You know that they might respond to a communication from you. What possible factors are going to be contributing to some students having more caring connections and which students are going to have fewer caring connections is something we're going to want to spend some time thinking through and talking through during this matching period. We might even want to be talking about which kinds of school-wide changes can be made to increase the number of caring adults in a student's life. And maybe, if there's time, even spend some time talking again among peers about what we can do individually to increase the number of caring connections. So really spend some time digging through the data, and then some time matching adults, caring adults with students, and talking through perhaps what is getting in the way of even more caring connections. What can we do as a school? What can we do individually? And then in closing, during the sort of final few minutes, I would say mark a reminder in the school calendar, mark a reminder in our personal calendars for 4 weeks after this first big reflective meeting. And then I would do it again 4 to 5 months after the initial reflective meeting. I would do this immediately as the meeting is ending. Make sure that you set aside some time for this. It's a very important step to make sure that you're following up, okay? And I'll talk about that now. Ooh, now. Sorry, we've got a pop-up box here. Elise, do you mind just letting us know, what is it that these tips here, what do you think? Looks like we've got a couple different tips. Looks like Elise might be muted, but that's okay. We're going to be sorting that sheet by sort of, again, at risk or caring, a caring connection. If you are going to be using the virtual list, you can, right up at the top, normally just kind of filter, and that might provide you an insight into, again, which kinds of students are connected, which kinds of students are at risk, and easily address whichever sort of group that you would like to quickly and easily. This will sort of help you prioritize. The other idea that I think we're suggesting here is provide teachers with maybe sentence stems or some other way of kind of getting into these conversations. I don't know that this is going to be necessary for every school adult. Many won't need this kind of support. Some may, though. And so having those available can be really helpful for those folks who, you know, their heart's in the right place. They really want to help. They really want to connect with a student, but they're not totally sure how to do that. Sentence stems can actually just provide a little bit of a launching pad. Okay, so some folks wonder kind of, again, how to begin these conversations. Ideally, staff, again, are going to be matched with students who they think maybe they already have a natural connection to. But if that's not the case, I think simply letting students know that, you know, of course, these are really trying times, and saying something along the lines of, listen, I know you and I don't really know each other that well, but I just wanted to let you know that, you know, you popped into my head, and I wanted to reach out and say hi and let you know that I was thinking about you and your fam. I hope everybody's doing well. And if you need anything at all, I hope you'll let me know. And I hope it's okay if I reach out and say hi from time to time. That first initial outreach, it doesn't have to be the deepest connection that's ever been made, right? And it's almost certainly not going to be. So we want to make sure that we're setting our own expectations well. We want to make sure that we're not bombarding students with sort of care and affection as much as we may want to. May also just sort of ask students how they've been feeling, kind of what they've been doing to take care of themselves, or what they've been doing to take care of others at this time, depending on the student. Those might be appropriate questions to ask. I think if a student is known well to a school adult, and they know of a student's passion, like I said, you can sort of leverage that to get into these conversations. But in any event, as I said, we're going to want to follow up on these initial connections in a cohort model. So essentially, this group of adults who have raised their hand, they've stepped forward and they've said, I am going to reach out to Elise and I'm going to build a caring connection with her. We really want to make sure that that person is supported. One of the best ways to do that is to sort of create a community and create some established expectations for sort of like behavior and how to collaborate around this work, create a supportive culture that's going to be conducive to some risk taking, because this does require a little bit of risk taking, and full participation, and really earnest participation. So 4 weeks after that initial reflective meeting, we'll reconvene those staff who've kind of committed to reaching out to young people. I think that this creates a real sense of community, a real sort of sense of a shared purpose and a shared challenge that we're rising to meet together. We can talk through, was a connection made to the student that we identified? If they didn't respond positively, maybe why might that have been? If a connection wasn't made at all, what seemed to be the obstacles? Or adversely, I had a great conversation with Elise. We talked for 10 minutes and, we're going to be sure to do it again next week. I think that those success stories can also be really kind of inspiring and helpful for the team, for the group of adults. So creating plans together, talking through problems of practice, talking through successes, these sort of follow-up meetings, I think, are great times for all of those things and more. Again, another planning meeting, sort of 2 months after the initial meeting is great. Reconvene again, do the same thing. But of course, let's be mindful of regular check-ins with both the students that we're reaching out to and perhaps with one another. I think this is especially true for administrators. If you are an administrator and you're introducing this work and you know that there's a group of adults who have chosen to sort of stand up and stand out and do more to connect with students, maybe checking in with each of those individuals infrequently, but informally, or rather frequently, but informally, can be helpful for them as well. Help them raise issues that they may be dealing with moment to moment. So those are the 3 big key steps. It's really going to be a matter of letting folks know about this, providing some time and space for people to do some mapping and some thinking and talking about relationships and the data that arise, and then making sure that we're reconvening with some regularity to sort of build that community of adults committed to this work and who are able to do the work together. It will take a certain amount of resilience, so having each other will be good. With that, I'm going to go ahead and take questions. It looks like we've got at least a couple in the Q&A. We've got Natalie asking us, it looks like maybe Natalie filled in the Q&A with some information that could have gone in the chat about where she's coming from. So thank you, Natalie. Alan, hello, good to have you back, Alan. Alan says, make parents, students feel that they're an integral part of the conversation. I think this is a great point, Alan. Thank you so much. I think that there are ways that you can reach out to homes. Making Care in Common, of course, right off the bat, I should say, has lots of resources for families. So if you're trying to make a school-home connection, you're trying to build connections with students and want that work to be ongoing at home, maybe we're trying to develop particular skills in students around caring, empathy, diligence, gratitude, whatever those kind of key skills are for relationship building, we want to be able to make sure that students are continuing to practice that at home. Again, check out the Making Care in Common website. We have a whole host of resources for families. In addition to that, though, and speaking to Alan's point, I think as we're reconvening each, let's say every 2 months or so, as a cohort of adults who are doing this relationship mapping, I think that those are great times to sort of plan out, how do we want to connect with families around this work? What would be the best medium to do that given our school and its culture? How do we make sure that we're reaching all families? So that might include, providing resources in different languages. It might be a matter of using text blast as opposed to email for some families. It might even be just making sure that we're touching base with particular families when they come to access resources at the school. That might be the only time we get in touch with them. And so just marking on the calendar, Elise was our student example a second ago. She's going to be our adult example now, but Elise is going to make sure to reach out to, this family in particular when they come to get food from the school, something along those lines, and really let them know that we're making a connection with their child. So those ideas and more, I think, are terrific. Alan, thanks again for raising the importance of that really tight connection between home and school. It's one that Making Care in Common focuses a lot on, and I think it's very important for the work of building relationships with students. We've got Lisa asks a question. She says, Glenn, the mapping is done by everyone. support staff, etc. But those adults matched with 1 to 2 students are volunteering. Adults opt in to do the check-in with students, or were you saying that every adult is matched, thus the sentence stems being on hand? Thanks. It's a great question, Lisa. Thank you for asking it. It's a good clarifying question. This is, I think, going to be best done by those folks who step forward. So I would highly recommend that once we have our mapping done and it's time to actually match adults, that we're first taking volunteers, people who really feel like they have the bandwidth, perhaps the skill set, the inclination to do this work. From there, if we feel like there are, students who are left on our list who are not connected, that may be a time when we're suggesting certain adults take on that role in a student's life. But in general, this is hopefully an opportunity for adults in the school to volunteer for this kind of work. But thank you, Lisa. That's a helpful question. Emily asks, how can we get more strategies like this from making caring common? Emily, such a good question. Emily is a longtime friend of Making Caring Common. So it's always good to have her, along with all these other folks who I see Christy's on here too. I'm going to take Christy's question next. Emily, thank you for asking. Of course, I did mention at the very, very beginning a little bit about our Caring Schools Network. Just to reiterate though, it's a wonderful opportunity to work closely with MCC. And what we do is essentially provide you support in gathering rich, important information from students, staff, families, really all school stakeholders about their experience of the school. We ask them survey questions about safety, values, discrimination, bullying, harassment, overall school environment, rules and expectations, a whole host of different questions, belonging and engagement. We take those data, provide you with really detailed reporting that will enable us together collaboratively to kind of hone in on those strategies that we think are going to most address our areas for growth. And of course, lean on some of those areas of strength that arise in the data as well. So a lot of strategies available to Caring Schools Network schools, especially following up on the data that we collect and really kind of using those as targeted interventions to address key areas and promote in young folks social, emotional, and ethical capacities like caring and empathy and gratitude. So Emily, thank you so much for that question. And then just another quick way is to head over to the website and click on the resources button up at the top, and you'll see a whole bunch of other resources as well. And then finally, Christy asks, hello, Christy. Again, another friend, longtime friend of MCC. So good to have all of you. Alan and Emily and Christy, and I think we have several others in the group here today. What other supplementary strategies do you recommend that would go with relationship mapping and hybrid/virtual learning? Great question. We often will pair relationship mapping with circle of concern. And that's really an opportunity for young folks to expand their empathy muscle, to really build that empathy muscle, to include folks who are particularly vulnerable or marginalized, folks who are perhaps different from them in some way. And it really kind of walks young people and the adults in their lives. So facilitators who are doing this work with young folks, I can say from my own experience, it helped me identify these folks who are in my world, but maybe I'm not thinking about regularly in kind and caring ways. Identify an individual or two and really start to pull them in, and then continue that expansion across the year. It's a great opportunity. It's a great tool. So I think it's one of those examples of the kind of genius on the other side of simplicity. And so do take a look. That's right on the website as well. I think that we're also, I just should mention, building out additional relationship mapping tools. So right now we are in the process of creating tools that help you match students to staff members based on student feedback as opposed to adult feedback, as well as those which are matching students to other students and even faculty to one another. So there's this sort of whole host of strategies that we think can support this work. And again, we have a whole large library of strategies, routines, games, and all of those are really meant to be kind of used in support of this work. So if you're curious about others, Christy and anybody else on the call, please do let us know. Get in touch with me via email, caringschools@makingcaringcommon.org. You can also just head right to the website. If you go to the Caring Schools Network landing page, there should be a button that says book a time with Glenn. You can book a time. We'll hop on the phone and I can talk through how to navigate the website or even just use an individual resource tool. So again, would love to hear from you. Hope that you'll get in touch. You know, my favorite part of my job is really being a resource to schools. So anytime I can talk to you and help you out, I look to do that. I remember what it's like to scour the web for tools and resources and then have to change everything on them. So hopefully this tool and others really provide you an opportunity to pick something up and run with it and just kind of implement it quickly and easily. These are meant to be low lift, easy to implement. We've got a whole host of them, and I really do encourage you to get in touch if you have additional questions. I'm seeing that the Q&A is slowing down. So I will go ahead and start to wrap up now, unless there are any others that people have and would like to ask. With that said, it looks like we're pretty much done here for the day. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much to those of you who asked questions. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. It's a real pleasure to have you, to be building this virtual community with you, and to provide you the tools and resources that you might use to create more caring and inclusive communities. With that said, thank you very much as well to Elise and for all of your help. And we will see you next time. Thank you very much. Have a great day.